What the Actual Fork podcast is co-hosted by two intuitive eating registered dietitians, yours truly, Sammy Previtt, owner of Fine Food Freedom, and Jenna Warner, owner of Happy, Strong, Healthy. We can't stand diet culture bullshit and love keeping it real. Our mission is for all humans to believe that they are made for so much more than chasing a smaller body. We are also here to share with you that food can be fun and pleasurable again. Although we are medical professionals, we are human too. We are not afraid to share our deepest, darkest secrets and how years of our lives were taken by diet culture. We started this podcast so no human has to feel alone in their journey towards food freedom. So get comfy and join us for a casual convo where you can expect to laugh, cry, learn, and grow. Welcome back to another episode of What the Actual Fork podcast. Today we had such a fun, I want to say relaxing conversation just because Kimmie was so relaxed. So
it really was.
It was. She made us so relaxed because she was so relaxed. But we had Miss Kimmie Singh on the podcast. She is a registered dietitian. She's a New York State certified dietitian. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Physics from St. John's University and her Master's of Science in Nutrition at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She completed her dietetic internship at Hunter College in New York City. Currently, Kimmie holds the position of treasurer on the board of Association of Size Diversity and Health. She's also a member of the International Federation of Eating Disorder Dietitians, and in her free time, which she clearly is doing a lot, but she also co-hosts the PCOS and Food Peace podcast with Julie Duffy Dillon, who we had on previously.
And before I finish this intro on her, she also talks about all you RD2Bs out there, some really interesting things that are going on in the internship program that she was a part of at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, which if I could go back in time, I would love to do that program. Anyways, before embarking on her nutrition training, Kimmie began studying intuitive eating and ways to improve one's relationship with food and body with a health at every size approach. Kimmie has experience in PCOS, eating disorders, disordered eating, and weight stigma. She also has a special passion for exploring the role of social inequity and ideas about food and body. Kimmie has a gentle and compassionate approach to nutrition counseling. She supports her clients by meeting them where they are as she encourages them to find joy and healing in their relationship with food. In her spare time, you can find Kimmie strolling through the park while listening to a podcast, baking, or enjoying a funny movie, and many more things that she shares in this episode.
Yes. I was just going to say that some of her favorite things are not listed there.
No, and he's updating.
Yes. And of course, we never want to give too much away in the intro, but, I think it's important to address like the big question that she covered so much more than this, but, as, very, being in this field, we get so many questions from nutrition students I want to be a dietitian, but I don't feel like I belong in this field. She covers that in such an amazing way. And if I ever get that question ever again in my DMs, I'm just sending this podcast right now with Kimmie's Instagram handle.
Yeah, it was really great. I mean, she touched on a lot of topics that we've maybe sprinkled in before, but with her own experience and her training and just the details that she shared and real life experiences that were actually very recent for her, just gives so much knowledge in this conversation. That's so important.
Yes. So let's get into our conversation with Kimmie Singh. Thank you so much, Kimmie Singh, for being here with us today. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yes. That feeling is so mutual.
Yes. Yes. I didn't even tell you this before we started recording, but I had talked to Jen a little bit is, one of the questions, which I'm jumping ahead right now, but I'm just so excited to ask you because I get this question in my inbox all the time is, I want to be a dietitian, but I don't see anybody who looks like me. and I'm afraid to go in this field when the majority of women are skinny white women. So we're definitely going to get into that in today's episode, because I have sent so many people to your page, Kimmie, because I'm like,
thanks.
there are dietitians that represent all sizes, colors, etc. So we'll get there. But before we do, we love to start every episode with hearing from you, our guest, of how have you gotten to where you are today, professionally and personally? You can take 30 seconds or 30 minutes, but tell us like how you became the body positive dietitian, you know, and what got you to where you are today.
Oh gosh, such a good question. I'm trying to think of like where I want to start. So
honestly, you can go all the way back.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times when I talk about it, I feel like it started in childhood. Like when I approached, I don't know the exact age, maybe it was like 8 or 9, but I just started to like have a body size that wasn't as thin as it once was. Like I don't think it was necessarily fat or larger, but it was just like not as thin, and it kind of became a topic of conversation in my household. This was the 90s, and I feel like there were a lot of really toxic conversations around like children's body sizes in the 90s. And so not only was it like my household, but we saw it on the news, and it was kind of like, it seemed like it was this worldwide thing. And as a child, it was a lot to take on. And so, I think that's about the age that I started dieting in some way, shape, or form. And then, I kind of like went in and out of diets for most, like, I guess all of my teenage years. And then it was after college that I learned that I had an eating disorder. And at that time, I was just kind of shook. I was like, what? Like how, I guess my idea of eating disorders, they were very, very stereotypical. I didn't study nutrition for my undergrad. And so it was something where like, I really didn't know much about eating disorders at all. And like when I learned I had one, it was really hard for me to believe, and it was hard for me to take seriously, but it did resonate with my experience of just sort of having that really toxic relationship with food. And so it was at that time that I decided I wanted to be a dietitian and sort of support folks the way my dietitian supported me. And I think that's kind of like in a nutshell how I got here, like personally, but then professionally, knowing that I wanted to be this kind of dietitian before starting my nutrition training. It was, although it was tough because I had to sit in some really toxic classes, it was also really nice because I learned to find more support outside of the program from like great fat positive dietitians, therapists who were really excited to mentor me. And I think it kind of like set this foundation of having a lot of support and a really good network of people to help me get through this like exhausting program. And I, like I feel like all students, like college students, grad students, undergrad, whatever, it's a tough time. It's a really tough time in your life, and it's really chaotic, and you're jumping from deadline into deadline. And so navigating all of that and also navigating the fat phobia, it was something that I don't think I could have done without that added support.
Do you ever wish that you could go back into those classes and like call out to the teachers and like say things like about how harmful the lessons are? Because now that I think the phrase that Evelyn Tribbley said to us in our episode is like, when you know better, you do better. Like now, if me being a student in those classes, I'd be like, excuse me. But it was just not a thing back then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was tough. Like sometimes I tried to speak up, but there were a lot of times that I was just like, oh, I just want to get through this class. Like I don't want it to become a whole thing that makes it really hard for me to just get through the class. But yeah, in hindsight, there are just so many ways that I've unlearned that information, and so many ways that going through the traditional dietetics training can really like instill a lot of biases and instill fat phobia. So any dietitian that's not actively unlearning this stuff, they don't realize that it's probably really sitting with them.
Yes. I think that's so impressive, Kimmie, that you got through a nutrition and dietetics program knowing all of this, because Jenna and I, like, we were both like contributing to the harm, right? When we were in the class. So like, I can't imagine. And that's a really good point too, is, Jenna and I work with a lot of interns. I'm sure you do as well with your business. Mm-hmm. And so many of them are, these nutrition students that are saying exactly that. They're like, how do I get through this program when I'm taking a weight management course that's literally telling me to restrict people, and I want to be an intuitive eating health at every size provider. I think what you just said was so important that we can touch on. And I would love to hear from you, like, what does that outside support look like? Or how did you seek outside support? Because I've never even thought to tell my dietitian, you know, obviously the nutrition students we work with, we try to help them. But what are some other ways that nutrition students that want to be health at every size aligned, like where can they seek that extra support?
Yeah, great question. So I'm thinking of when I first started to get connected, it was because we had Julie Duffy Dillon guest speak on eating disorders. So I think like if you're a dietitian and you live near a university and like asking if you can guest speak, it could be a great way to sort of like build that bridge between yourself and the students. And then for students, honestly, like I know ASDA, the Association for Size Diversity and Health, they have like a directory, and this directory has a lot of healthcare providers that are totally HAES. And if you kind of look through there, you can see who's in your area. I would really just recommend like going to their websites, maybe sending them a request, telling them about yourself. And then I know like outside of getting connected to your local community, there's also, oh gosh, I'm going to have to send you all the link to put in the show notes or something, but I think it's called ADDS. I just spoke, they had a panel. It's like something, association of like, oh gosh, I think anti-diet. No, it's anti-diet dietetic students. I'm pretty sure.
Yes,
yeah, and so it's you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so like they're great, and it sounds like they're a great way to find some like peer support. So I think having peer support can be great. So you just know that you're not the only one going through it. But yeah, it's exhausting. I think another thing is like not internalizing the guilt of if you can't speak up all the time. Because I know for me, even when I look back, I'm like, oh, I wish I spoke up more. But it's also like you have to trust your body that you're doing your best. So the same thing that you'll do in the future as a dietitian, encouraging folks to trust their bodies, is something you can start practicing now when learning how to advocate.
Yes, that, like Jenna said earlier, and what you just said, Kimmie, reminds me of our Evelyn Tribole episode. She dropped the bomb of like, when you're talking to somebody, are they reachable? Are they teachable? Because if not, like you need to just protect your mental energy. And sometimes even when we speak up, we can leave those conversations feeling more defeated, and it like takes more from us than it actually helped. And so, like you said, releasing that responsibility and giving yourself permission to just like put your head down, get shit done, so then you can move on to bigger and better things. Exactly what you're doing right now.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think like, yeah, getting what you need to get done. And I know like for my program, I found a couple of professors that were really supportive. And since then, I was able to help change some things in the curriculum, or like we'll support them to make the changes in the curriculum. And I've been involved in their dietetic internship. So now they have a fully health at every size rotation. So if there are any nutrition students listening that want that HAES rotation, it's the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And it's a really great option if you're looking for programs.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
Truly. I know we have Sammy opened with a question before we got into your bio that we want to get back to, but I was just looking through your Instagram and it looks like one of your most viral posts is one that really we've already started talking about on this episode, but I just want to read it out loud and just get your feedback on it because it's so powerful. And it says, if your concerns for fat individuals' health do not include concerns for how weight stigma harms fat people, then you do not have concerns, you have fat phobia. I don't think that there's ever been a better Twitter post that I've seen that just says so much in so few words. And I would just love to hear, the inspiration behind that post or the response that you got from it, anything that you can share from that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So the inspiration for this post, I was updating my presentation on weight stigma, and I was going through some of the more recent literature on like the harmful effects that we see and how it really has an effect on a physiological level. And I was just like, I learned like in all the news headlines, you see so much that's so like this fear-mongering content. And you can just see it's not at all about health. And I feel like the way people shame folks, the way they try to morally defend themselves is hiding behind the, oh no, we just care about their health. And so when you do that, it's just, it makes me really frustrated, but it also makes no sense. Come on, get it together. And it's, it's funny you're mentioning it now. Well, funny is a weird word, but it's interesting you're mentioning it now because just last night I was at a Mets game and oh my gosh, it's really frustrating. Like I was at a Mets game and there was an older couple and they were in larger bodies. And there was a woman like sitting next to them and she wanted to like switch seats to sit further down the row, but she kept going in and out. And the older woman said like, I'm really not comfortable with you going in and out. Can you please sit in your assigned seat? And I was sitting behind them and I was not at all trying to like eavesdrop, but I saw this woman texting the most fat phobic thing to someone about this couple, saying like criticizing them for drinking soda, criticizing them for not wanting to go in and out. And this is an elderly woman with a cane. Like it was something that was so inhumane. And the whole time she's doing this, she's hiding her phone to her chest so the couple doesn't see her doing it. And her kids are watching, her kids are reading the message. Like it's just one of those things where I feel like people know it's really harmful and they try to hide behind this whole like, oh yeah, it's about their health to make themselves feel better and to try to like put some of that shame aside. But it is really something that you can't hide behind it. It's just reality. It's your own biases coming out.
That is what a great example, right? Of fat phobia, that like very real time. And how, I mean, I can't imagine, you know, like Jen and I always like to say, we are here to support all dietitians, all medical providers, especially those in larger bodies, because we can't pretend to understand the fat shaming, the oppression, the discrimination that you face. How do you respond to trolls? Do you even give them the time of day, or is it just like, is it Shayna, the nutrition tea? She told us block and be blessed. Like, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
That's line.
Like, how do you respond to people that just clearly don't get it and are so rude and terrible?
Yeah, good question. I personally don't respond. I kind of delete and block and like, yeah, be blessed or not be blessed. It's whatever. but yeah, it's but you know, I have to say because I am not as active these days, I don't get a whole lot of trolls. But when I do, it's just a delete and block. But I always get some folks saying something like, oh, you're never going to have a job or you're never going to be successful. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? I already have a job. Thankfully, I'm doing well with my work. But like, it's just one of those things where people like to assume, and people, yeah, it's a terrible place online. And I know this sounds so cheesy, but I also like hope those people get their stuff together, because if you're on my account leaving mean comments, I can't imagine how unkind you are to yourself or how tough things are for you, that this is like how your extra time is being spent. Yeah,
Couldn't
I
agree
don't know. It's
more
really
with that.
sad.
And that touches on too what you were saying about the Mets game. Like my next couple thoughts on this woman is, you know, just how many of her own insecurities about food and nutrition she must have, and the poor kids. So there's that. It says so much more about the way that about her than it does about anything else.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, at that point, are you even enjoying the game? Like it was so distracting for everyone around us, because she was kind of like overreacting and was so angry. And it was just kind of like, you're taking this experience away from your family, from the people sitting around you, from yourself. It's tough. Like I think like for me, when I'm kind of on the receiving end of fat phobia, when I can get to a place where I guess I'm more grounded in my thought, I really do feel for those people, because like they're not happy, and they might try to like seek out moments of comfort or connection with other fat phobic people. But at the end of the day, when they're kind of alone in their body, they're still sitting with those really painful feelings. So yeah, it's tough.
But how it says so much about your work, and just how, like you said, how grounded you are, that you can go from a place that I'm sure years ago that might have been like super triggering, but now it's like you can just sit in empathy for them, like because of how much work you've done. For those listening, that let's say they're not the woman at the Mets game, right? Yeah. They're more informed about health at every size. They're more informed about fat phobia, but they're still recognizing. Like I saw a post somewhere the other day, I forget what it was, but it was saying like, if you say you're not fat phobic, but you don't want to be fat, and being like, well, that's fat phobia. So do you have any tips or just things that you really go to when you're working with clients, or even whether it be on social media, of just how to address fat phobia, how to be curious about it within yourself, and how to really work through it?
Yeah, oh, great question. So I think like for clinicians, whether it's a student or a provider, something I usually remind folks to do is like check in with how many fat people are in your life outside of your clients or your colleagues, because there's something really different when you're seeing someone like as a peer-to-peer versus more through that professional lens where you're the person of power. And then sort of like if you do see someone in a larger body and they fit that stereotype, whatever, you know, whatever it is, like how does that sit with you? Are you avoiding that discomfort? Like how does it feel to sit with it? To sort of maybe like are you expecting folks to fall into that good fatty box where it's like people performing healthy behaviors? I find that for a lot of people that are sort of like maybe on the fence with learning how to check in with their own fat phobia, they're like, okay, like we believe you can be fat and healthy too. And like, I think that's where I get kind of like, okay, well, and what if you can't? Like, what if one day we get a bunch of research and we're like, okay, you can't be fat and healthy? That changes nothing. Like, you still shouldn't treat fat people like shit. Fat people still, I don't know if this podcast allows cursing. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yes, it
girl.
I
does.
always like to yeah, but so like you still
You're in
shouldn't
the
treat
right
fat
place.
people like shit. And also like fat people can still exist and do what they want with their bodies. Like so I think it is a lot more radical than like, okay, we're all, you know, like trying to love our bodies. And it might feel safer for someone to engage with that positive, fun side of things, and maybe to check in with a part of them that wants to sort of run away from the tougher parts might be a good way to get started.
That's awesome. Such great knowledge. And I think it comes back to a lot of what intuitive eating is based around, or Held at Every Size, is just that continue to lean into the curiosity about like, why is that uncomfortable for you? What's coming up? Whereas diet culture is very black and white. And a lot of times people that are engaging in fat phobia are very like good, bad, like they can't see that gray area. So really starting to lean into that.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I imagine that like for anybody listening, when they start to lean into that gray, it'll probably help them in a lot of areas in their own personal life where they're struggling to embrace that gray.
Well, I feel like we're at the point right now where we should go back to that opening question, but I don't even remember what it was.
I can remind you. It was just that, and it kind of goes right off of that, because I think a big part of it is, you know, when we think about traditional nutrition and dietetics, there's no class. Well, in my experience, I had no classes on fat phobia. So I think that can be helpful for just what you just spoke about for these future RDs to like really lean into that. But I guess my question or our question for you, Kimmie, is these future dietitians, right? We want to change the way, all of us, I would agree, are pretty much on the same page. If we want to change the way that dietitians are showing up, we want to remove the guilt and the stigma and the shame and just practice out of a body positive, fat positive lens. For dietitians or future dietitians, let's say, that reside in larger bodies, what tips do you have for them of how to be confident and to show up in this space and let them know how much they're needed?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, such a great question. A couple of things. Like one is it definitely gets better in terms of like when you're a dietitian outside of the training process, you have autonomy. I think what's really scary about the training process is it sort of feels like this RD title is something being held over your head and you don't know if you're ever going to get it, especially because you feel so ostracized by the actual profession. So that feeling goes away and there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think for me, the most beautiful moment was when a client said, like, I've never had a healthcare provider that looked like me before. And it was just something that really sat with me. It was early on. And yeah, so knowing it gets better, I think, yeah, another one is like having your space to sort of like disconnect from all things like haze, nutrition, food related. I know like all dietitians get burnt out of all the food talk, but then when it comes to like haze and fat phobia, because I literally experience these things like on a day-to-day level, and it's also my work, I need to have some outlets outside of it and some hobbies outside of it. So now that I have the time to, that I'm not like, tied into school, it's been really nice to have more time outside of that. And if I were to go back to my student self, I would sort of encourage myself to do that. Yeah. And then, the last thing I would mention, probably the most important, is like good therapy, like good size affirming therapy. I definitely don't think I would have been able to get through it if I didn't have that support. Yeah.
Amazing. And Jenna, I feel like maybe you telepathically have the same question in your head as me. Kimmie, what are some of your favorite hobbies? Completely not related to health at every size, nutrition, like nothing related to this podcast.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I'm going to be totally honest. I'm kind of like into houseplants, but some of mine are not thriving right now. So it's like a struggle. It's a struggle hobby. You can see some of my plants behind me. One of them is like a prayer plant that's like on the verge of going, but I will save it. So like learning more about that. I've been enjoying like watercoloring and coloring with my friends on FaceTime. That's been a really fun part of the pandemic. I learned how to give myself my own manicures. Like they're not perfect, but it's yeah. So the pandemic really helped me with some hobbies at home. I really enjoy what was I going to say? Oh, I enjoy time with my cats. I had like adopted 2 cats over the holidays, and that's been really fun. What else? I love gardening, and now that I'm back in New York City, I don't have like a lot of space to garden, so I'm trying to do some like balcony gardening. So it's just learning how to do the urban gardening thing is fun. I can try to like have more, just sort of have more greenery in my life outside of the indoor plants that are struggling. So
I literally I can't keep an orchid alive. Like they don't die. And I can't keep a succulent alive.
It's really hard. Yeah, I was gifted this beautiful succulent from my sister-in-law recently. And like literally within 2 weeks, it's like almost done. Like so I'm trying to bring it back. Yeah, it's really hard. And I thought the only way you can like kill a succulent is by overwatering it, but this succulent is shriveling up. It looks like it's drying up. So I watered it a lot and that did not help. And so we'll see what happens. But
my mom comes over.
What'd you say?
My mom comes over and like will inspect like my plants sometimes, and she like took my dead orchid a couple weeks ago and was like, you need to shun it. It needs some time like in its own corner. And I was like, okay, it's never gonna happen. And the thing is fucking blooming in the corner of my house that I never go to. It hasn't been touched, it hasn't been watered, it hasn't been looked at. I'm like, I don't understand this.
That is so funny. Like an introvert orchid that needs to be away from everything.
It needs to be alone.
Yeah. And I feel like my hobbies don't like interact well because my cats, I love them, but they love to like mess with my plants. And so it's a whole, so finding a way for those to coexist is still a process. And I've been into board games. That's another one. It gets heated during Monopoly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It gets heated. We've had some like board flips, not me, other people. It's really funny. Oh my gosh.
I love that you brought this into the conversation though, because a lot of people don't have that piece of advice. And I know that's been something that's been really important for me in this journey. And Jen, I'm sure same for you, is like, it's so easy to just get wrapped into this, especially with the social media. And if you own your own business, and it's just like this never ending conversation. Like you'll find yourself on the couch at like 9:30 at night, like responding to DMs. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
So like angry.
Yeah. Like
I know.
Getting a life outside of your work and doing things that make you genuinely happy are so important. So thank you so much for offering that up in this conversation.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's been really fun, honestly. I mean, my Instagram is so neglected, but so I'm trying to find the balance of holding space for both. Yeah.
Well, it's giving people a chance to go back and look at some of the knowledge bombs that you have on here too. There's a post that you reposted, I think, that was about more than health. And I think that one's really powerful too. You were talking about how you're presenting at a presentation, but that topic alone, we could do a whole other episode on. So maybe we will have you back for
Oh
that
my
because
gosh,
that leaves me with
yes.
lots of questions, just about all of the work that you do. And we're so grateful. Before we get into like our final questions, we always like to ask our guests on here if there's anything. So if somebody listened to this entire episode and they were like, I need one thing to go home with, I want one final bit from you, what would that be? What would you leave them with? What would be the most important thing that you would want them to hear out of this conversation?
Oh gosh. Okay, give me a moment. Let me
take your time.
I have quotes like all over my office, so I'm looking around for inspiration. Oh my gosh. Okay, I think more than anything, I say this to my clients all the time. I think sometimes we get caught up in like waiting for like food to be perfect, like our relationship with food and body be perfect. And I think in reality, as long as you have ebbs and flows in life, like there's just going to be times where you're feeling maybe a little bit different about your body, or food doesn't feel like it's ever at like a perfect place. And I think part of this is learning how to like embrace that. And it doesn't mean that things will always feel disordered or like diety. That's not at all what I mean. But I think sort of stepping away from like one day everything will be fine to more like, oh, that day is here. I can try to embrace this moment the best I can. Like there's the quote, what is it? Bloom where you're planted. I really like that. So like really thriving in this moment.
Comes full circle with your plants as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so true. I didn't even think about it.
It's perfect. I love that. And so Kimmie, for people that are listening that are like, I need to find her, I need to learn more, where can they go? And where would be the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, so I know we talked about this behind the scenes, but I'm kind of rebranding. So I'm going to give my current like handles and website, knowing that like everything will be able to be redirected, including social media. Like I'll have my updated one where this account was. But so my website is bodypositivedietitian.com, and my Instagram, where I'm most active usually, is bodypositive_dietitian. And yeah, I would love to hear from you if you are a student or someone that wants to be a dietitian and you just feel like you don't fit in the profession. Please reach out. I would love to support you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimmie, for everything that you shared today.
Yeah, thank you
for being here.
My pleasure.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of What the Actual Fork Pod. We know there are a lot of pods out there, and we are so grateful that you are here listening with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, like, share with all your friends and faves, and follow along with us on social at What the Actual Fork Pod. We promise to continue to bring you the hottest topics, greatest guests, and the most fun you can possibly have while fighting diet culture bullshit. We love you, we appreciate you, and we will see you next week for a lot more fun.